One law, one nation, 1 century of silence finally broken. For generations, the people of Burkina Faso lived on soil they worked, inherited, and protected yet rarely owned. Fields passed through calloused hands, but the signatures of ownership belonged elsewhere, to distant investors, to powerful families, to agreements written far from the villages that depended on them. It was a paradox carved into the landscape itself, a land rich in history, yet governed by rules that placed its people last. Then came a moment that cut through the noise. With a single declaration, the government announced that every inch of land, every field, every forest, every river would now belong to the state, not to be sold, not to be traded, not to be locked behind titles or distant corporate portfolios. Instead, to be held in trust for the citizens who rely on it. A guardian system, not a marketplace. A correction to a pattern that had shaped more than 100 years of quiet loss. It was a decision that startled the world, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. It challenged an old global logic, one in which land was a commodity first and a lifeline second. And it forced a new question. If the soil beneath a nation is restored to its people, what future does that unlock? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers. It keeps the story alive. Because what comes next is not just policy. It is the story of a people rediscovering the ground beneath their feet. For more than a century, a quiet erosion unfolded across the African continent. Not the erosion of soil, but of ownership. An erosion measured not in rainfall or seasons, but in contracts, concessions, and signatures that traveled farther than the people they affected. In Burkina Faso, this erosion shaped the lives of millions. Families tended land without ever holding deeds. Villages expanded, only to be pushed back by mining zones approved far away. Farmers planted seeds on soil that could be taken without warning. And year after year, the map changed in ways most citizens never chose. It did not happen through war. It did not happen through violent conquest. It happened through paperwork, through clauses written in languages many villagers did not speak, through deals exchanged behind closed doors, where the price of land was calculated without counting the people living upon it. For decades, foreign investors acquired vast territories for export farming, luxury tourism, industrial mining, or long-term speculation. Local elites followed the same path, accumulating thousands of hectares, while ordinary citizens struggled for small, insecure plots. The result was a nation of workers without ownership, communities without protection, and a landscape whose future was shaped by those who would never live on it. It was a wound carried quietly, passed from one generation to the next. Then came the rupture. In a single decision, the government declared that all land in Burkina Faso, from the most remote village to the busiest town, would become the property of the state. Not a state acting as a buyer, not a state acting as a seller, a state acting as custodian, a guardian of the national inheritance, holding the soil in trust for every citizen, regardless of wealth, lineage, or influence. Under this reform, no individual may claim permanent ownership, no corporation may buy vast estates, no foreign government may secure exclusive rights to land. The logic is simple. Land should serve those who depend on it, not those who see it as a financial asset. This shift was not an act of hostility. It was an attempt to correct a structural imbalance, a recognition that the old model had created layers of inequality between foreign corporations and local communities, between elites and small farmers, between those with documents and those with only hope. The reform echoed a deeper truth long felt but rarely spoken, that land is identity, land is security, land is future. And when the ground beneath a nation becomes a commodity traded away, dignity becomes fragile. For Ibrahim Traore, the reform was not about accumulating power, but about redistributing it away from those who held it in excess and toward those who needed it to survive. Yet even this statement sparked debate worldwide. Critics argued it was too radical, supporters argued it was long overdue, and citizens, many of whom had lived in uncertainty for years, felt a sense of relief that could not easily be measured on a balance sheet. But passing a law is only one step. The soil still needed to be transformed from a legal category into a living promise. And the world still wondered, what would happen when a nation reclaimed the very foundation of its existence? Because a law, no matter how bold, is only the seed. The real story begins when a nation decides what to grow from it. Before the reform, land in Burkina Faso followed a quiet but relentless logic. Whoever had money, influence, or the right connections gained access. Everyone else waited, hoped, or fought small battles they rarely won. Land was not a home, it was a market stall. And in that marketplace, the price kept rising while security kept shrinking. The old system created its own kind of regret, a slow, lingering disappointment that lived in the stories of ordinary people. A farmer could work the same field for 30 years, yet lose it overnight because someone arrived with a document stamped in an office he had never visited. A mother could build a home on ancestral soil, only to discover that the land had been promised to a developer. A village could wake up to survey markers signaling an upcoming project that would not employ its residents, feed its children, or protect its rivers. This was not chaos, it was structure. A structure built on the assumption that land should be owned by those who could purchase it, not by those who relied upon it. The consequences were predictable: evictions, disputes, costly lawsuits, and families forced to rent the very soil their grandparents once cultivated freely. And beneath all these tensions lay a deeper ache, the knowledge that the land beneath one's feet was never truly safe. The new model sought to break this cycle completely. By making the state the custodian of all land, the reform removed the profit motive from land ownership. No more selling to the highest bidder, no more quiet accumulation by elites, no more transfers of vast territories to foreign entities. Instead, land would be allocated based on need, purpose, and national interest criteria designed to support communities, not corporations. This change did more than shift legal definitions. It shifted psychological ground. A land held by the state is harder to steal, harder to manipulate, harder to bend toward private agendas. When no individual owns the soil outright, corruption finds fewer entry points. Boundaries become clearer, disputes become fewer, and the inheritance of a nation becomes something protected collectively rather than guarded privately. It also transformed national planning. Under the old system, building a road meant negotiating with numerous private landowners, some cooperative, others not. Constructing schools or clinics required compensation battles that could drag on for years. Developing infrastructure felt like moving through a maze, one built not from walls, but from deeds. The new model opened those pathways. With the state as custodian, strategic development no longer depended on the willingness of landowners. Planning became a question of purpose, not permission. Roads could connect remote communities. Irrigation systems could be expanded without obstruction. Renewable energy grids could be designed for the entire population, not only for those who could afford to negotiate. Yet the emotional core of this reform is not efficiency, it is dignity. There is dignity in knowing that your home cannot be sold from beneath you. There is dignity in planting seeds without fearing uprooting. There is dignity in teaching children on land protected by law, not by luck. In a world where millions still live with fragile access to the soil that feeds them, dignity itself becomes a form of security. But a question lingered, whispered across villages and towns. If the state now held all land, who would it give access to first? Farmers, women, youth, private businesses, cooperatives? And on what terms? The answer would shape the nation's future and decide whether the reform was merely symbolic or truly transformative. Because land without people is barren, but people without land are powerless. And so the nation stepped into its most delicate chapter, deciding not just who held the land, but who could build a future upon it. If reclaiming the land was the first step, redistributing it with purpose was the second, and the far more complex one. A nation can take back its soil in a moment, but deciding how to place it back into the hands of its people requires patience, courage, and clarity. Burkina Faso called this new era Phase 2, a phase not defined by ownership but by opportunity. For decades, countless farmers lived in a paradox. They were the backbone of the nation's food supply, yet many did not have secure rights to the fields they tended. They rented small plots from landlords or foreign companies. They lived with a quiet fear that at the end of any season, their land could be reassigned, reclaimed, or sold. This fear sank into their routines. It shaped how much they invested, how much they planted, and how much hope they dared to hold. Under Phase 2, the first group to receive guaranteed access was these small farmers. The state offered them land not as compensation, but as recognition. With stable rights came training in irrigation, soil regeneration, crop rotation, climate-smart practices, and improved seeds. Tractors replaced hand tools in some regions. Shared equipment centers appeared in others. Farmers were no longer planting for survival.